47 nobles joined the National Assembly, led by the Duke of Orleans, cousin of the king and supporter of the revolution. He had, of course, recently begun to refer to himself as Philippe Égalité, or Philip Equality. On the same day, Parisians form an unofficial municipal council in Paris. So by June the 27th, there are very few left who support the king. He orders the remainder of the First and Second Estates to join the National Assembly. Yet on the other hand, he calls his troops to surround Paris and Versailles. This is seen as a threat to the triumph of the Assembly, and many fear that Louis will try to regain control by force. The National Assembly now renames itself the National Constituent Assembly, and they ask the king to withdraw the troops. So in the background, though, we have Necker, who for the most part has been passive during this time, and while he didn't actively encourage events, neither did he oppose them. On June the 11th, he is dismissed by the king, which was a very clever move, because it provokes popular unrest amongst the peasants, the workers, and the middle class. There are demonstrations at the Palais Royal, troops clash with the public at the Tuileries, the stock exchange closes in protest, crowds loot gun dealers and begin to arm themselves. The customs posts in Paris are attacked, and there is widespread looting and violence. Most importantly, the Gardes Français, the French guards from the household troops of Louis, refuse to fire on demonstrators and, in fact, begin to mingle or fraternise with them. So we come to the evening of the 12th of July, where some leading Parisians form a permanent committee and set up a militia or private army made up of mostly bourgeois to keep order in the streets. Meanwhile, the people start erecting barricades around the city. Again, the National Constituent Assembly, meeting the next morning, declares that it will sit permanently. It won't be disbanded. It will stay until it needs to, and it calls for the removal of troops. On July 14th, the mob takes over. They make their way through the city to the Bastille, which is a prison fortress and is representative of the powers of the king to arrest and imprison without trial. It is a symbol of absolutism, if ever there was one. The archives of the Bastille show that the building largely held common criminals like forgers, embezzlers, swindlers, etc., as well as people imprisoned for religious reasons, so Huguenots, which is the name for French Protestants, who we know were persona non grata up until the Edict of Toleration, which Louis XIV revoked, so they were still really nobody and had no legal rights. Also those responsible for printing or writing forbidden pamphlets, so it held some political prisoners as well. Not at this point, however, because there's only 7 people there, plus the governor. Sometimes people of high rank were held there, and so the prison, which really could only hold about 50 people, was not really as bad a place as other Parisian prisons. But because it was secret and because it was old and historical, it had a very sinister reputation. So the confrontation that led to the people of Paris storming the Bastille on the 14th of July 1789 followed several days of violence. Many people believed that gunpowder and arms had been stored there, and the people demanded access to these. Of course, they had been subject to rumours about troops surrounding the city and wanted to defend themselves, but also they didn't want to get this far and let the king take over again. So the idea that they wanted to storm the Bastille to free the prisoners is not really accurate and has been discounted by most historians, because at the end of the day there are only 7 there. And in the, I guess what you would call the old people's home, there were 82 veteran soldiers who were no longer capable of service in the field, and they were looked after in the same building, called the Invalides, I think. And they were still under the protection of the governor of the Bastille, de Launay. So really there's 7 prisoners only there, and there's 82 old soldiers. So it's not this great battle. However, having said that, there were the troops surrounding Paris still that the king had ordered. Now, during the unrest, a mob approached the Bastille to demand the arms and ammunition stored there, of which there was, and when the force guarding the structure resisted, not many of them, the attackers captured the prison. They released all 7 prisoners, and it is certain that some of the king's own household troops, the French Guard, actually aided the crowd. There were some of those who guarded the Bastille were killed, and Delaunay was killed, and he was decapitated, and his head was paraded on a pike, which the French seemed to love to do. Louis seems to have recognised that he couldn't rely on his troops anymore when he went to the National Constituent Assembly and informed them that he'd called the troops away from Paris and Versailles. Meanwhile, in Paris, the committee I spoke of earlier, which had been gathering, now formed themselves into a commune. They made their headquarters at the Hotel de Ville and elected a mayor of Paris, Bailly. They then formed a National Guard, I guess to replace the militia. None other than Lafayette was the commander. Of course, Necker was recalled to office on July 16th. And the king, in a sure sign of capitulation to the new order, visited Paris. He was welcomed by Bailly at the Hotel de Ville, and he showed his support, at least on the outside, by wearing the revolutionary cockade. Was this defeat? Was there anyone left who still supported him? Well, given the apparent victory of people power, there were royalists who remained. However, these were in some hurry to leave the country, and so began a pattern of emigration of those who were against the revolution. The most notable among these was the Comte d'Artois, who came back to haunt the revolutionaries a bit later on. So, there we have, up until July. What would happen next? We'll have to wait to find out.